off-roaders typically fall into one of two camps. You've got the dedicated off-road rigs that ride like cabbage carts on the road but are killer off-road, and then you've got the modern day soft roader with the off-road trim package. Now these will typically get you to the campsite, but not much beyond the campsite. Now look, fundamentally, there is nothing wrong with the latter. I actually love the modern day soft roader that has some of those off-road bits and pieces like tires and orange tow hooks and a roof rack, because they're better at daily life. They go through the snow easier, sometimes they're more comfortable, they're easier to get in and out of. These people seem quite happy with their bowl of cherries, even if they do look a little lifeless. But my point is, there's nothing wrong with the modern day off-roady crossover. I actually think it's a very effective piece of kit. But here's the thing. The modern day soft roader crossover is somewhat limited in what it can do beyond the pavement. And I think people at their core, they understand this, right? They understand that a little bit of cladding, a little bit of additional tire, and a roof rack don't make an off-roader an off-roader. Now Hyundai has the XRT line of products that's been for sale for a number of years, and when XRT launched, it really was just color and trim. But to Hyundai's credit, on vehicles like the new Palisade, they've gone a step further. It has some suspension changes. It also has real integrated orange tow hooks, orange being the strongest color, and the one I drove even had a prototype skid plate in the front. So if you end up a little ambitious in where you take your Palisade XRT Pro, you're not going to end up out of luck. But what's crazy is Hyundai has realized maybe there's a market beyond just a soft roader. Maybe there's a market for a compact off-roader that not only looks the part, but has some added capability. And that's what I'm here to check out today at their design headquarters here in Orange County. Now, this is something I bet you'd never, ever expect to see on a Hyundai. Real off-road tires. And I'm not talking some 28 or 29 inch thing. I'm talking a 35 inch tall off-road tire with real clearance, rocker protection, integrated recovery points in the front, and what looks to be a very capable off-road platform underneath. This is the Hyundai Crater concept, and what we're going to find out today is Hyundai actually serious about this off-road thing. Now this is pretty nuts because Hyundai didn't just design this Crater with their other cars in a normal studio. They've actually built a full room here at the design headquarters in California where they've brought along the things that they think an off-roader might need. They've brought along things that you might want to accessorize an off-roader with. I'm talking traction aids, I'm talking suspension, lights, and this kind of thing. And to outfit an entire massive division of their California offices with this off-road in mind tells me that they might be up to something beyond just a little bit of trim and some cladding. Now let's take a look at this Crater concept and find out what they're up to, because there are some familiar Hyundai design elements here, and there are some things that are totally out of this world for the Korean manufacturer. So you do see this pixel design throughout with the 4 pixels in the front, these daytime running lights, and then you'll also see those pixel designs down here for the headlights. That's all pretty normal Hyundai, but what isn't normal Hyundai is the crazy approach angle of this vehicle. So they've designed this front end around the approach angle, so you have clearance for the front tires here. And all of this is designed to be beefy steel or aluminum skid plating along the front and underneath. So we're not going to find a typical plastic bumper that might get smushed if you were to accidentally bump it into a rock. And then we come to the most important part of a lot of off-roaders, and that's the recovery points. This vehicle does have genuine recovery points in the front end. Now they are a little tucked in. It's still a concept. I'm not sure you're going to be able to get a screw pin bow shackle through this recovery point, but it does actually have a cool little Easter egg here. It doubles as a bottle opener, which is pretty cool. And then underneath, once again, that whole area, we're going to find pretty beefy skid plating, which is very cool. Now, as we come along to the side of this vehicle, it does have these urban camo flares. It's a little too street oriented for me if I had to make any criticism of the exterior design, but it is hiding a proper off-road tire. Now I am noticing that they've removed all sorts of kind of decaling, but if I'm not mistaken, I think that is a genuine BF Goodrich tire, or no, that sidewall's a Falcon. That's an 8T4W. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but it's a real tire wrapped around not some 25-inch tall wheel. It's an 18-inch wheel, which is great. So that tells me that Hyundai actually understands, like, look, if you're gonna go take your vehicle off-road, you don't want a 20-inch dub, you want a real small wheel so you can maximize that size of that sidewall. And then behind this, I am noticing suspension. This is a full independent suspension vehicle, and I'll be really curious to see if Hyundai puts this thing into production. Are they gonna take suspension seriously? This is one of the biggest drawbacks with all of the modern day soft road crossovers. I'm talking the Forester Wilderness, I'm talking the Passport Trail Sport, I'm talking the XRT models, is they've got the height, but they don't have the geometry to work with the ground, to articulate to obstacles and holes and that kind of thing. So if Hyundai were to go a little further down with this XRT line, I really hope they emphasize that. Now, as we make our way toward the side profile and the rear of this Crater concept, we're gonna notice a couple of things. First of all, it does have this integrated roof rack, which is pretty cool. And my favorite design element on this car are the roof-mounted lights. So much like the old school Casey daylighters back in the day that had these little smiley faces, the yellow ones, you remember them on your CJs and that kind of thing. Well, they've incorporated something similar on this Hyundai Crater concept, but what they've done is they've created a little man. He's called Crater Man. You'll see him on the front tow hooks, you'll see him like on the roof rack, but he actually smiles at you from the integrated off-road lights up top, which is very cool. Now, out back here, we are gonna find more of that integrated recovery point and that crazy departure angle, which tells me that, listen, at least from a body in white standpoint, Hyundai knows that, like, you're gonna have to approach things, you're gonna have to go down things. So that's very, very, very cool to see. Now, here's where things get interesting. This is still very much a design study. They're not talking about powertrains, but based on the urban camo and based on what they've told me, this is fundamentally an EV oriented design, right? But that isn't to say that there isn't potential for an internal combustion version, because when you start sneaking and poking around on the inside, I did notice one of the little screens has a little option for 4 high, 4 low. So that also tells me, like, look, the fundamental drawback, the fundamental problem with all of the modern day crossovers that claim to be off-roaders is they're only a single speed transfer case. So when you get them off-road, you build a tremendous amount of heat in the transmission, especially if it's a dual clutch transmission, you start wearing things out and then things go bad really quickly. But Hyundai knows that, which is why that potentially this has an actual low range built in along with a huge number of drive modes. So in previous XRTs, they didn't have any special off-road modes, but if you look at the actual steering wheel of the Crater, it's got a lot of different off-road modes that can dial this vehicle into the different settings you need to actually hit the dirt. Now inside, Hyundai has gone a little mad with the Crater design. First of all, I love the seats. They're so very retro 1980s Recaro with these big circular cushions throughout, and it is a concept, so it does have full shoulder belts. But what a departure from anything we've seen on the market today. They hold you in tight and they just feel great. The steering wheel, front and center, steering square, more like. I'm not a big fan of square squircle steering wheels, but it does have all the different off-road modes right there where you need them, and there's even a display on the steering wheel that'll cycle through the different settings. And what I love about this interior more than anything is it isn't centered around some massive TV-like display. It has physical tactile controls and knobs. And look, if I'm going on an off-road adventure, I don't want to be shaking around trying to navigate through screens. I want to have a knob there that's always where I want it, click through the different settings, and I hope, please, if Hyundai were to make this into a production vehicle, just like physical controls for locking differentials. Give me a button, give me a switch. If you're really cool, give me an overhead switch. And make it a tactile experience, right? And I think Hyundai's done a pretty cool job with this. Now, it does have some things which are a little gimmicky, albeit very fun. It has like different game modes, which are, you know, whatever, but it has a camping setting, which I think is cool. You can get, you know, that little the fire thing on the windshield, or you can, you know, have a setting where it'll infrared look for animals and campfires and that kind of thing. So Hyundai's kind of experimenting, how can we integrate technology in with a very modern day experience? But I think the big takeaways are no screens, they project it onto the windshield, which is a very different look, and then very tactile controls, which if this is an indication of where Hyundai's going, thank goodness, because we just need especially in a four-wheel drive, you want to be able to interact with things through buttons and levers and knobs instead of fumbling around on a screen. I also like too how with phone integration, bring your own phone setup, so you can put your phone there, interact with that on the dash instead of going through some massive display. So I think they've done a lot of really good things on the inside. For a concept vehicle, they said this thing does have the coach door setup where they open up from the front and the back instead of in the center. So, I mean, realistically, that i3 FJ Cruiser style design is very cool in a concept, doesn't work very well in the real world. But my big takeaway from the inside is that it kind of has that nice proportion of being small on the inside, outside, but very big and usable on the inside. Very smart. I think what we see here with this crater concept is Hyundai coming out and saying, look, we've done XRT in the past, and they've done a good job on several vehicles like the Palisade. They've done maybe a less good job on some vehicles like the Santa Cruz, where it's mostly just an appearance group. But they realize that what we need with this XRT is more than just a little bit of orange and a little bit of camo graphics. What we need is a real proper off-road machine with 35-inch tall tires, maybe a diff lock, maybe even a low range to be taken seriously by the American SUV market, right? This is something Mercedes figured out a long time ago, but very few other manufacturers do, where, yeah, a G-Wagon never sees dirt, so why does it need 3 locking differentials? Because it needs to be the ultimate. People need to have in the back of their head that, yeah, look, it may never see dirt, but it can, right? It's such a silly thing, especially if you're a product planner, to go to your boss and be like, we need to give it 35s. And then the engineering team is like, oh, don't give it 35s because we can't meet our MPG targets. And then the crash people are like, oh, that makes it hard to make handle. But if Hyundai is going to be successful at this, they need to push through that dumb data and just understand that Americans want that capability. They want it to say Rubicon on the side, to know they can go down the Rubicon Trail, even if that sacrifices on-road performance, even that sacrifices MPG, you have to do it. So that's my big advice to Hyundai. Not that they'd listen to a nerd like me, I certainly wouldn't, but if you're gonna be taken seriously in the four-wheel drive space in the USA, you can't only make it look cool, it has to work cool. And I'm not saying that this has to go do the Rubicon Trail, but it has to be able to do Hell's Revenge, right? Maybe a trail that's a 4, 5, or 6 out of 10, not a 10 out of 10. Because to prove to the US market that, like, yes, XRT means business, it can't just look cool, it has to work cool. That's the eloquence that you come to hear from me. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think of the crazy crater concept. I'd say Hyundai, you built the cool studio to build it in, now let's make it a reality. And as always, head over to alltfl.com. We'll see you in the next video.